And so, yeah, let's go on to Russell Brand's person that I want to talk about a little bit, because I think Mark Fisher's Vampire Castle essay is right on the money. The what is it? The anarchists, blanking it on, but I like that section a lot. Russell Brand's an interesting case because I do think it was absurd when people taking him to task for like not being right on enough back then. There, I also like come down on the other side of a little bit with. I don't think like Russell Brand serving anybody by having Candace Owens on for a third time. I don't think like we should make it a like priority to cancel Candace Owens, but I think like we be honest about this, or like we have to be honest about what Candace Owens is, and when you are taking her seriously, you're sending a certain kind of message I think is dishonest about some of these people, and like Dave Rubin's another one, right? Like. A chunk of my career has been in defining Dave Rubin as something he was saying he wasn't, which is I like a conservative, right? And
well, now he seems to have come around.
right, exactly. Yeah, now he's embracing it. But so like where do you like speak to this tension a little bit? Because I think negative definition and like I like Hitchens' first book. I mentioned Hitchens a lot in this context, which maybe says something. But Letters to a Young Contrarian, where he says no light without heat. And I like that. I like, mix it up a little bit. Like, I'm curious. Yeah. Talk a little bit about that.
I like mixing it up a little bit, but I think that there are more, I mean, look, I don't, if, whatever other bad things some people might, might think about me since they saw the title of the book and lost their minds. At least I think one thing everybody does, I hope, know about me is that I really like fighting with conservatives. I mean,
right.
That's like 99.9% of what I do. So I like mixing it up. But I think that I think it's worth thinking about the more and less useful ways to do it, because and I mean, I don't think Russell Brand, like. I think he's a mixed bag. I think that what exactly he's trying to accomplish with those Candace Owen interview, he might be making some weird decisions there. But like putting that aside, I think that if you are going like you're you're a student and your university invites, I don't know, Ben Shapiro or somebody to speak there. And if the way that you bring the heat is by circulating a petition for them not to invite him,
yes,
and protesting, that he's been invited, and maybe protest in a somewhat disruptive way that's easy to play as they're trying to stop him from speaking, you've just handed a gift to Ben Shapiro. That's what he lives for. That's the best possible PR that he could give. Look, I'm so dangerous. Right, that they can't even let me talk.
Forbidden knowledge is the selling point they have.
No, exactly. Forbidden knowledge is the whole thing. I mean, again, Milo, his he literally toured campuses. It was called the Dangerous. It was like, I don't remember what exactly the phrase was, but like dangerous was part of it.
F word after, yeah, the world's most dangerous.
Yeah. And that was the whole thing. Ben Shapiro's book, The Right Side of History. He has the back cover is all about how many like cops they needed at the University of California, whatever the hell it was, to protect him from speeching. Brett Weinstein wouldn't have a career without what happened at Evergreen. We would never have to hear that guy's opinions ever. So that they love. Whereas the Dave Rubin example is perfect because when people, I mean, thanks in large part to you and you guys, like when people, like if somebody is outside of a Dave Rubin event with like a protest sign, there's like a 98% chance that what that sign is going to say is debate Sam Cedar, which is actually a really effective.
Right. That's a good posture to be seen on, like a challenging one, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Because so that lets you have some heat, that lets you, protest. So it's you're not just like sitting at home and ignoring it, but you're doing it in such a way that instead of making them look subversively dangerous and like people can't handle them, it makes them look like they're afraid. That seems like a way better approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, I think one of the bigger points of your book is making in our engagement with the right wing is that acting like they're untouchable or so dangerous to interact with makes them feel, seem way too strong.
It's not trusting of your fellow man when you do that. Like, right? Like people can't make this decision for themselves. Like it is. I mean, I keep coming back to this.
Maybe like their arguments are so convincing,
yeah,
that if you hear them, then you're just going to turn into like a big Ben Shapiro, which I'm telling y'all is the opposite. People who I've met in my life who are big, right wingers, typically have only the left presented to them in this incredible, false narrative way that like the Ben Shapiro presents it as, right? So it's to our disadvantage to let people like Ben Shapiro just sort of march around the globe and, and say, no one will debate me. Even though it must be said, there are plenty of people who are willing to engage with him and everyone's favorite boy, Jordan Peterson.
Yes, who actually, I mean, it's amazing because, a little bit of diversion, but if I can do this for just a minute, like the Peterson thing is particularly incredible to me because back in 2018, Jordan Peterson was going to be on my editor Doug Lane's podcasts, and he was scheduled. He was on the books. Then either Peterson himself, or more likely somebody who works for him, figured out who Doug was, that this wasn't going to be a friendly interview, and they canceled it.
right.
Not 2 weeks later, Peterson was on the Joe Rogan show, and Rogan said, "Hey, these equality of outcome Marxists you're always talking about, why don't you ever debate one of them?" And he said, "Well, they don't want to talk to me," and which I'm glad all that happened, because I wouldn't know you guys if that series of events I just mentioned hadn't happened, because what that then led Doug to do in collaboration with some people in Idaho was to organize this conference, Move and Debate, which is where I met Michael and, et cetera. So the fact that was 3 years ago and still Peterson is pretending that publicly pretending that people don't want to debate him. 3 years after that, 2 years and change after he weaseled out of debating Richard Wolff, 2 years after he did debate Slavoj Žižek and it went very badly for him. So yeah, these guys will certainly lie about it. No question about it. Right. I just think, and this is, but I think that maybe it's a very small point, but it's one that's worth taking a second on, that sometimes when you talk about stuff about how the left presents itself, optics, the image we project to the world, a way too easy way of kind of evading all those critiques is to say, well, whatever, it doesn't matter. They'll just spin whatever we do. They'll the corporate media, the right wing, whatever, they'll lie. They'll, so why are you even that concerned about that? And of course, there's a germ of truth to it. They totally will, right? But also that's just a counsel of defeat. That's just saying, oh, we're just going to give up on winning any sort of like victories in a rhetorical war with these people, and just completely ignore it. It's like, yes, they do have a lot of cards. They are very unscrupulous. They will lie and they will spin things, but also why on earth would you make it easier for them?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great point on that. And before we move on to some of these other little things that we want to talk about, because we have some fun stuff too that we wanted to get to while we have friend Ben here, I did want to ask you, because I just get frustrated when I see this get rehashed, and I'm sure you probably get frustrated too. Again, with everyone getting worked up about the concept of cancel culture and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Let me just make my quick argument or pitch here on a point that I think is important, and might be because look, it's important. What you're saying is we want the left to be attractive to people, right? We want to bring people in, right?
Yeah.
But again, I just wanted to hit, to take a second stab at this. What some people get worked up about is they think that means rejecting, fighting for people, for example, trans rights, or making sure that people are identified and treated in a certain way that they deserve to be treated, right? And what some people think is a criticism of cancel culture, which again is a slippery thing that covers honestly too much. What they think this means is we're saying reject that, don't have those conversations, so we can be the cool kids who can just have the mass platform. Now, I'd be curious what you think about this, but I would just say, very briefly, the only way that these things change in society is building community, and organizations that are bringing people from different communities and different experiences together. To put it most concretely, you look at the studies of what happens in unions across the United States, where people who are working in multiracial unions tend to have less racist views, right? And that's because people are recognizing themselves as part of a common community, and we're working through those issues. That doesn't mean that every interaction that people have is perfect and that there aren't exceptions, but this is the kind of historical slog that is needed to create these kind of, more communitarian like dreams that we have for society. The problem with a lot of the way that people are engaging with these fights now is walling things off. Is saying like the left and the social struggle is like, this is for us. This is for the people who already know all the correct things, who already know all the correct positions. And if you don't come into it with these, you're not going to learn either. Right. And I would say this, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. So I'd be curious to hear your response to this. I would say that's the only way you're going to successfully build it right now, because what we've created on the left, especially the online left, the people who are familiar with these arguments and understand these concepts, is if we don't have a kind of outward looking perspective that is fixated on building mass politics and mass movements, we won't be successful both on the political arena of like liberating people from the struggle of, of living under capitalism and all these other things. And we also won't be successful in these other avenues of life either. Because the hope of our politics is that it's emancipatory, because we have the potential power as a working class to do it, but also by bringing people together, we can sort of cut through a lot of the BS that gets pumped into us from the get-go, right? So for me, the argument about cancel culture is twofold. It's like, let's make this attractive so people come in, and then two, if you want to deal with these issues in people's heads and the way that people think about the world, if you want to engage them, you have to have something that is inviting so people can have the space to learn.
Yeah, those were all words I'm pretty happy to have in my mouth. So yeah, I agree with 100% of all that. I guess just to expand on a couple of elements of it a little bit. I do agree that especially lately, I think the phrase cancel culture has, because it's been so totally absorbed into kind of day-to-day partisan nonsense, it's gotten really expanded. Like I feel like a year ago, God, not even a year ago, when we had like 6 years of discourse about the Harper's open letter, like at least back then, I felt like I knew what everyone meant when they used that phrase. Mm-hmm. Now it's gotten a little weird.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the Harper's letter is like, I knew what everybody meant. They meant different things. Like I knew what Chomsky meant. I knew what Jeet here meant. I knew what Barry Weiss meant, and they were like slightly different. But yeah, I take your point.
Yeah. But like, I think that now that like there's all this stuff where, like oftentimes, of course, Republicans and conservatives are going to take any concept and mangle it, until it's unrecognizable. I mean, that's just the breaks. So, like instead of talking about what I always thought we were talking about, which is online, like kind of mob, pile-ons and hair trigger denunciations and try to get people fired or deplatformed. Now we're talking about like 100 things. There's this like, like the Dr. Seuss, whatever that was, and all of that. And I don't care about most of those things, but I think that I do care about the sort of hair trigger denunciations and trying to go after people and get them fired or deplatformed. And I particularly care about it. Obviously, none of that stuff that I just mentioned is by any stretch of the imagination unique to the left. It happens, it happens on the right. Certainly, you can find people trying to like online campaigns to get some Starbucks barista fired, because she said F Trump, it happens all the time. Probably more than any other direction. It happens from like centrists, like they're probably
Absolutely.
the worst offenders. But I'm particularly concerned about the way that it interacts with the pathologies of the left and the way that it distorts the way that we act, because I want us to win. If the rest of those factions are toxic and unappealing, then great, I'm happy, right? But I don't want us to be toxic and unappealing. And I hear what Griscom is saying about the, like, okay, so you don't want this to get twisted up as trans rights are unimportant, gay rights are unimportant, countering misogyny is unimportant, because of course none of those things are true. Those things are all important. I would point out that I think there's a lot of mythology about socialists being class reductionists and stuff like that. I point out that historically, if you go back and look at the civil rights movement, or even earlier, like the rise of sort of mass industrial unions in the 30s, socialists and communists who were at the forefront of those fights were actually the people, really the only people almost in the United States who cared about civil rights back then. That if you look at Bernie as mayor of Burlington, he was talking about trans rights when, like, almost nobody, in the world was. I think that there are a couple reasons for that. One is that as socialists, we know that none of these issues actually do cleanly divide off from economics. If your boss can fire you for being gay or trans, that's an economic issue. If there are some countries are dominating, other countries and stopping them from being economically sovereign, that's certainly an economic issue. And we could say the same thing in numerous other cases. And the other thing, of course, is why would you be a socialist in the first place if you didn't have some basic egalitarian impulses? And I think all that's totally right. But again, the question I just relentlessly go back to is, what's a strategy that's going to work? And I really like what David said about that. I often think I'm, probably to an unhealthy extent, I always think of like every issue in terms of like movie references, but I always think of that I think it's like from the 80s. James Earl Jones was in it. I remember Madawan. You guys see Madawan?
No.
Okay, you should watch Madawan. It's a great movie. It's like actually a shocking thing that this was made in the Hollywood studio system. It's about the coal wars in West Virginia in the 1920s. The main character is like a wobbly union organizer, and in that movie, it accurately depicts. So it's like a it's a very white redneck kind of mining town. And they've brought in some black workers to be scabs during the strike, but then I think James Earl Jones, is the character who's leading them, and they're willing to cross over and join the union. And then they have these union meetings where they're like, I don't know, do we really have to let black people in the union? I don't like that, And then like you even get like these things that are like more fine grained. There are people who like don't like the fact they're Italians in the union, and you get arguments about that. But I think what it does correctly show is that historically, one of the best ways of getting people to get over that stuff, and certainly a better strategy than anything else I've heard, is to be involved in some kind of common struggle where you're working together with people in ways that you see as serving all of your interests. And oftentimes, just the fact that you have that intense common experience can do more to humanize people in other identity categories than anything can. Certainly, it's going to do more to affect those kinds of changes in attitudes than sort of interpersonal shunning and excommunication, or I don't even know what the liberal answer is at this point, force everybody in the world to go to Robin DiAngelo trainings or something like that. I don't think any of that's going to work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's what we were saying about anti-racism becoming not a demand for structural change, but a management project. And I think you touched on it a little bit, but one of where I am a bit unagreeable in this topic is and you don't do this in your book. It's when you portray the censoriousness as a specific left pathology, because I think there is a massive effort to do that right now, to say like it's liberal backstabbing that's setting up for like any kind of coming purge. And like I just think, for the sense, like we're talking about Guatemala, the Jakarta method, just the mass killing based on ideology that it created the world we live in today. And that's really my main concern about this discussion. And I think
even in the United States, I mean, there's McCarthyism, and whatever. I mean, like, memories are very, very short.
Well, and McCarthyism, they came off touting that they were going to go after both fascism and communism equally. And which way did that go? So I think that is the ultimate. I guess that is, I think, a very important lesson. I think to remember in terms of the way this can go, because I think that was McCarthyism was the state wanting to get a hold of the ideological apparatus that was Hollywood, basically, and the CEOs, to take it back from like the workers that might be red. And I think like that's really the context for what we're talking about tech, I think, too. And I think you're right in stressing like the way the left should be seen in entering this fight, which is more
I'd also
democracy.
point out that we don't need to go as far back as McCarthyism. I mean, I'm a few years older than you guys. I can vividly remember, the Bush administration, which was a time when the culture was extremely censorious. From like a right-wing jingoistic perspective. I mean, that was the time people were like, burning, piles of, Dixie Chicks, albums and, and whatnot. That's so I think that. I think that right now there are certain kinds of censoriousness that have a sort of woke flavoring to them because of larger cultural changes. But I also think that if you're focused on that, then you're missing the boat on the larger thing that's going on. Because like that changes, right? Like this is the fact that now like every Fortune 500 company, is going to like issue statements about, Black lives and possibly even structural racism. Although, as you point out, I'd be fascinated to hear what the structure is that they have in mind. But like, not that long ago, it was all these, like the we saw corporate censorship, certainly of the anti-war movement, etc. And I think that as long as these kinds of corporate oligarchs are in charge, I mean, like, which cultural norms they're enforcing might shift over time.
Absolutely.
But I mean, that's not the main problem.